Good evening. This is Iko Koo. I'm giving an update on today's trial at the Southwark Crown Court, where the Hyde Park four, their names will remain anonymous here because not all of them have agreed to have their names given out on the video here. And I'm going to explain what the testimony of 3 police officers was in relation to the injuries they received on the day, and they've been picked presumably because they did receive injuries on that day. But first came a final session of cross-examination of the Chief Inspector, Paddy O'Hara, and basically it was a recapping of some of the events from the day before, some of the talk from the day before, but it was being asked by someone who self-represented themselves at the court. There were a couple of key takeaways, so I'm going to try and stick to some very basics today. This should be quite a short video. One of the issues was that the police headquarters, O'Hara was questioned about the preparation of the police in terms of their numbers, uniform, and nearby stationed police. So, for example, apparently there were 75 police stationed in Grosvenor Square, which is about 150, 200 metres away from the Hyde Park area, and they weren't brought in. The question was asked, which I think is a very relevant question, to Chief Inspector O'Hara: were there any plainclothes officers amongst the crowd? And Chief Inspector O'Hara said, "Not that I'm aware of." Now, it's quite clear, and he had only been brought into the preparation for the event, for the protest demonstration on the 24th of April 2021, the day before. So he didn't actually have any real background knowledge or preparation for what was going on. Now this comes on to another question, which is the question about their claims that their intervention on the demonstration was perfect, couldn't have been done differently, would not be done differently if today. Well, you have to ask yourself, given the fact there was a demonstration a month before, I think it was the 20th of March 2021, and you can look online and you'll see there was a battle in Hyde Park after an anti-lockdown demonstration, a large monthly anti-lockdown demonstration. There was a battle in the open field in Hyde Park between TSG units, randomly grabbing a couple of people, mostly women, and backwards and forwards between protesters and the police. And so the police leadership could certainly not possibly have assessed what happened in Hyde Park a month before with reference to their preparation for what happened a month later. And don't forget, this was the time when there had been a sort of universal outrage about the behaviour of the police in going into the crowd at the Sarah Everard event. And then there was outrage. The Prime Minister was concerned, Boris Johnson at the time. The Mayor of London was horrified, and so on. And then a few days later, the police battled with us at Speaker's Corner on the 20th of March, and you can see the video on Subject Access on the YouTube channel here. I'll post it underneath as for reference. I'll post a number of other videos for reference as well. So where was the learning, if there was any, inside the police? Or is the change in tactics something to do with the change in optics as far as the police are concerned? So were they intentionally creating circumstance which would suit them in the press to smear the anti-lockdown protest as violent thugs attacking police, which is a violent mob, I think they call it, anti-vax mob, it was called in the newspapers at the time. So, and then the next point is that I think, was it the month after that? I think it was the month after that the police did something. Well, it was Jam for Freedom again. So Jam for Freedom were in the park. I think it was a month later in the June protest. And we had marched to Chiswick and come back from Chiswick. And Jam for Freedom were playing in the park. It was a warm, sunny day. And not many people made it right the way back to the park that time. And then the police surrounded us, and I think I counted 36 TSG vans in the park surrounding us. And they'd also blockaded, they'd put down a number of plastic barricades inside the park to prevent us moving from one place to another, to try and create some sort of, I don't know, suitable blockaded terrain inside the park. And then they surrounded us with vans, and a number of us tried to prevent the police from attacking and tried to discern what they were planning to do. And they waited around for a while, and then we noticed them gathering together to start discussing their preparations for intervention. The police suddenly tooled up with all their kit, and then they moved in on us. And just before that, we managed to get to the crowd, get to the band, and warn them they're about to come in. And so we left, like literally that moment, just before the police came in. And the police were really pissed off that we left without having been commanded to leave by them, that we left, even though they turned up with such force to arrest us all. And so that was a kind of an affront to their planning operation. And I remember I was going around at that time playing Benny Hill and so on, and they they didn't like that, and they didn't like any of our actions actually. And then when I got outside the park, they arrested me for playing music too loud in the park. That was the argument. Playing Benny Hill. You may remember the video of my police interview. So the point about that is that there were a number. There was the Sarah Everard event. There was the 20th of March protest. Then there was the 24th of April, which is on trial today. And then there was another event where the police intervened with new military-style tactics. So clearly they had the objective from the previous event to try and conquer Hyde Park. And don't forget, they'd lost on the previous event again on the 20th of March. So the idea that these are random events, I think, is it's stretching the imagination, let's put it that way. I'm not saying the police aren't incompetent enough to do something like that, but nevertheless, you'd think, there is some sort of military type style thing. And this was talked about actually during the course of the trial today, about the command centre operation. And it was quite interesting that they spoke about their command centre, which is in a bunker, to control the command over protests. It's in a bunker in Lambeth. That's what they said to us during the course of the trial today. Now, I won't go into all the ins and outs of detail. One issue I got wrong yesterday was it wasn't me who came and spoke at the event, which the police pointed out, because today one of them said it was Piers Corbyn came along. So Piers came along and he made a speech on a megaphone nearby where the band was, shortly before the police intervened. Now, one of the police officers by the name of Andreas Milligan, PC Andreas Milligan, you may remember he had sort of grey hair, his hat was off, and one woman was pushing him backwards. One member of one of the protesters was pushing him backwards because he did have an injury on his head, a bloody injury on his head, which he says was from a bottle hitting him on the head. And he did, to my opinion, he did seem very disorientated on the day. His behaviour was very erratic once he had this blood pouring down his head. It was very erratic and very unusual. So I think he suffered some kind of concussion or extreme adrenaline rush, which led him to behave kind of erratically. He said that Chief Inspector O'Hara had gone into the crowd just before the lines of police arrived and had used his megaphone, and he heard him on his megaphone because he had a very distinctive voice, and so he remembered very sure that he heard O'Hara address the crowd with his megaphone. O'Hara claimed he was going into the band area in order to speak to them, to encourage them to leave the park. So this was the story that circulated. The problem with that argument is, or that statement is that O'Hara himself said he never managed to say anything on the megaphone. Okay, so we have one specific direct contradiction between their own arguments, but okay, these things in the heat of the moment, particularly with a bang on the head, perhaps this couldn't remember. He didn't write down his statement until several days after the events, and he claimed that his actual statement, his written notes were covered in blood, and so couldn't be used, and they had to be written again. So I've got no reason to disbelieve that. He says they were shoved and pushed, and the majority of people, when the police got to the crowd, the majority of people were assaulted them, and here's the crux of the argument, physically and verbally. So, you know, it's quite clear that the majority of people, when you attack them, are going to verbally assault you. But it's not quite the same thing to say the majority of people are physically assaulting you. And by linking the two things together, verbally and physically assaulted, you know, sort of, oh, he's insulted me. You know, he's moved towards me aggressively. You know, that's the type of, the type of line they're trying to take on that. I think it's a little bit, well, it's just a preposterous exaggeration. You march into people and you don't expect them to respond to you verbally. I think it's just stretching the imagination, isn't it? And then they gave the show of strength order. So the police have what's called a show of strength order. Show of strength order means pull out the baton and prepare to whack, you know. So that was the game. So that was what they did. And he said he witnessed several strikes by the police using their batons to gain space and to keep a distance from the protesters, to keep the protesters at distance. He lost his own baton, by the way. He lost his own baton. Now, and his hat fell to the ground and was swimming in blood. There was one young lad you might have seen. I don't remember his name, unfortunately, but he's on quite a few of the protests. Quite a big lad, and he looks, as this guy said, Scandinavian. And he was a scholar gentleman because he intervened to prevent the police being attacked. However, if you look at Banaman's video, this guy is completely clear that the police were to blame for what happened. That this was not our fault. He did, however, try to prevent, you know, the violence escalating, and the people who played that role played a very good role, in my opinion, because it's one thing to say the police attacked us. It's another thing to say, look, we actually even protected them. You know, because the anger was so great that, of course, some people were very enraged and prepared to lash out. And then there is, of course, the question, which the senior police officer addressed, that, or at least mentioned, or at least spoke to, that he's not aware whether there were secret police amongst us. But one person told me today, who was there on the day, that she had been by the Speaker's Corner Cafe and had witnessed at the very early stages someone dressed in black with a mask on their face, and which of course is not a typical characteristic of the protesters on the anti-lockdown demonstrations, dressed in black with a mask covering their face, dark glasses as well, throwing a bottle into the conflict. And a lot of the bottles, I must say, came from quite far behind during the protest. And there are images, for example, even when we went right the way backwards, we pushed them right the way backwards, or they'd withdrawn right the way backwards. There's an image, for example, of one of these guys, a guy with dark glasses and a mask and a black outfit, a slim guy, running up to a police officer and just sort of shoving him. And you wonder what it's about. And actually, Fiona Rose Diamond comes in between and like pushes, stands between the guy. So I don't know who this guy is. I don't think he's been tried for anything. I don't think there's been any attempt to find him, perhaps he could be found in the ranks of the police. That's just speculation. I don't have any idea whether that would be true or not. I mean, it's very unlikely, isn't it? Police don't do that sort of thing. Now, one of the roles of this officer by the name of Milligan was that he was to protect O'Hara. Now, after they had reached the fence and they had been replaced by TSG units, Milligan, the guy with the blood on his head, he was asked by one of the accused, why did you attack us? So he tried to beckon him towards, and there's video from his own camera showing him being asked, why did you attack a peaceful protest? And he said, "Sir," quote, "Sir, you were asked to leave the park on several occasions." Now, that isn't true. We were not asked to leave the park. The police just stormed in. So the procedure, they were supposed to go, just to repeat again, the 4 E's, explain, encourage, engage, explain, encourage, enforce. And these 4 E's that they claimed were the foundations for their relationship to protesters who were supposedly in breach of coronavirus. Things was supposed to be followed. Now, then there were 3 questions asked by the prosecution barrister. The threat assessment. The officer said that it was an unknown risk. He thought that the feel of the day was very low risk, and so they weren't adopting any tough public order tactics. They were asking people to leave the park, so he claims. In 25 years of working in public order, this was one of the most hostile public order events he had ever seen, he said. Communication, the tactical question, verbal communication did not work, asking did not work, and they used baton strikes to push people away and shouting, as they always did, "Stand back!" And then they pushed people. So they would admit they were pushing people, they were hitting them with sticks in order to keep them away, and that was the sort of, and the verbal communication with the crowd didn't work. The use of force, they said they abided by the legislation, and this is an interesting point. Quite a few people in the public gallery noted this. If we strike, we must justify our actions, and under common law, we can use force. Now, this was then cross-questioned effectively, and that is in relation to a baton used by one of the, which was taken actually, one of the defendants said he confiscated the baton from the police officer. So this is speaking to the question of whether or not and what degree the public have the right to use force against members of the police who are using force illegally in their interpretation, in the interpretation of the public. Now, this comes on to one of the next officers. Let me just return quickly to this officer. I'll come back to that question in a minute. But this officer, he was asked about public safety and what his views were. And it was clear that he was sort of speaking on these questions of COVID, you see. It's not like something like, an anti-war demonstration or a strike demonstration or Extinction Rebellion, this sort of thing. This was something that was deeply rooted in people. For years we'd been locked up. In this case, 1.5 years we'd been locked up, actually, in one way or another. And the police officer said, well, we weren't the police officers, we weren't jabbed yet. So in other words, he thought he's making out he was in danger because he wasn't yet jabbed. And therefore we were a threat to him. And him and his colleagues, they were all threatened by the fact that people were protesting and coming close to them, although they came close to us. And they hadn't yet, poor souls, been jabbed. Then he was talking about masks, and he said the worst aspect of the whole thing was that some people grabbed the masks off them. So they're running around in the park with a mask on, trying to whack people or being attacked by people. They're charging into groups of people. They're arresting people, pinning them down on the floor. And his main concern is that a mask might be taken off his face, because then, of course, he could catch COVID. Later, he was asked about, well, why you didn't have a mask when you were checking up on one of the people who'd been arrested on the ground. And he went up close to him and he said, well, he said actually his mask was a bit bloody. And again, as with the previous day, the officer said he couldn't breathe properly. And so he took the mask off. And again, this is really not, this is in breach of the WHO rules. So just want to make clear that it wasn't me who said that. It was a police officer who said that. Because wearing a mask, according to the WHO and the health authorities in Britain, does not prevent you from getting oxygen. So I don't know where the police officer is getting. Maybe he's just subjectively imagining that having a mask on his face might hinder his access to oxygen. And the same thing was said by Chief Inspector O'Hara the day before, and he was claiming that a smoke bomb, when it went off, meant he had to his mask was restricting his freedom to breathe. Again, that can't be true if masks are, don't reduce your oxygen intake, as is claimed. Now, you, of course, and I might have a different opinion on that. He also said there were lots of conspiracy theories going around, but the judge tried to push the issue such that the police were independent and not taking any stance on the issue, and it wasn't anchored in their soul to try and, or that we were a negative force. Instead of this, they were treating us with all the due equality that they treat everyone else. That was the argument. Aiming, of course, at the jury, Now, yeah, so now we get on to the... Okay, there was a female police officer. Her baton was taken from her. She had a head injury and she went to hospital. She didn't require any stitching. She described the mood quite a little bit differently to the other police officers. She described the mood as more and more people getting drunk. I don't know if she's a teetotaler or religious or something like that. But she seemed to be very negative about people having alcohol. And she said that the atmosphere was changing quite a bit earlier than the other police officer too. Of course, this is a subjective question, but that's what she was saying. She also said that they had a briefing at about 6:30 where they were told that they would go in and potentially shut down the music. And this was not in what Chief Inspector O'Hara said. So this is in contradiction. So rather than engage and discuss with the people, she's saying they wanted to shut it down. And there are other police officers who made witness statements which have yet to be presented, who said that they had instructions to seize the musical equipment. So there is a contradiction here between the senior level, the officers who've already spoken who were injured, and other officers who are coming up. So there is a direct contradiction as to what they were ordered to do, why they attacked, why they moved into us, and provoked a response. Now, she describes that when they got to the crowd, people linked arms. Now that was in my opinion, it was one of the great moments when you watch the videos. You see the people, there's a solidarity, a unity, we are not taking this anymore. And they joined arms, and people were rock solid. And they joined arms to prevent the police. And then many of the same people joined arms or at the very end to prevent the protesters or agent provocateurs or angry people from you know, escalating this any further. There wasn't any point in escalating in any case from anybody's point of view. We weren't going to win anything there, apart from what we had already won, which was to show the police that we weren't going to take any shit from them. Excuse my French. Now, one of the, I won't do too much, they use this term bubble, you know, when they arrest someone, they encircle the person in the bubble. So Nacho, you know, was prepared to go, be mentioned here, was arrested, detained on the ground. One of the officers said someone tried to protect him, and he was kicked by the policeman tried to kick them. Again, these sort of things they just say, you know. Of course, I tried to kick him. I whacked him. I tried to kick him. I pushed the person out of the way. I shoved them. And of course, if we were to say those things, then of course we're criminals. But because they're acting in the name of the law, then of course they think they're justified, and without a blink, they say these things. Now, one of the defendants basically said, I was confiscating your baton because, you know, this was a... And then the question came is, what is a baton? And this was really quite amusing. The officer concerned said that a baton, well, she was asked, is a baton a weapon? And she looked like, it could be. And then they said, well, is it a weapon? It could be. But, and of course it's true, you know, I mean, is my cup a weapon? Well, if I'm hurling it in someone's face, then it is a weapon. And if I have it in my pocket, specifically with a sharp edge on it, ready to whack people on the street, or if my duty is to go around with a baton in order to hit people, well, it clearly is a weapon. I mean, it's preposterous. But she literally stood there pretending she didn't know that a baton is a weapon. It's quite extraordinary. And then this is the most bizarre thing that happened, right? So the CPS pulled out an extendable baton, which was held in a like a liter plastic cup. They had this baton, the extendable baton, standing in that, and they brought this up to the police officer, and then they put it on a table, and the police officer was looking at this baton, and then they said, do you want some protection? And this is just the most bizarre thing. And the police officer basically said yes. So they went to get a pair of rubber gloves for her to touch the baton. And she put on these rubber gloves as if the baton somehow has got COVID on it. It was just bizarre. And she demonstratively, they had to go in another room, go and get the gloves. And then she put on the rubber gloves in order to touch the baton and hold the baton. And then she confirmed it is a baton. Quite extraordinary. And then, having taken the baton away, she took her gloves off, stuck them in her pocket, and then proceeded to touch all the... I mean, this is just the most bizarre thing. And it was to try and, I don't know, reenact the COVID scenario or something like that. But if the baton is a carrier of COVID, what are you doing flying around, like flailing it around everywhere? I mean, it's just bizarre nonsense, you know. Complete madness and lunacy. But that's... at least it was entertaining to watch. You know, everyone was like... In the public gallery, everyone was like perplexed. What on earth is this about? But, you know... They all got straight faces, and they've all got these little curly things on their heads, you know. And the judge and the barrister, and, you know. What madness. So there's not much more to this, actually. The next officer had their hat knocked off their head. They did have some sort of... Something hit them on the head as well. Someone tried to take her baton off her as well. And she She was quite small, it's true, and she said she felt again threatened and fearful. The atmosphere was unsettling. It was almost carnage. There was blood. There were flares. It was unsettling. I drew my baton because I feared for my safety. Well, the flip side is this. You don't think we feared for our safety when we were being attacked by police officers? When we were dragged to the ground? When we were arrested in a de facto totalitarian state that existed during that time? You don't think we felt threatened? It's ridiculous. And there was an incident. If you look on I will post this underneath a little bit later on, a link to a video by Banaman, which is really quite amusing. But I noticed that it was actually, as far as I can make out, it was on the same day, and the people were over by the fenced area. It had either just happened or I think it just finished actually, this altercation with the police by the fence, and the TSG had replaced them and it was calming down. And further over in the park, there were 4 blue-jacketed police officers, who I believe were police liaison, who had carried on wandering around the park and picked on some guy who looked a bit Indian or North African, and tried to arrest him. And I think he just was sitting on the grass and didn't like the idea they would like order him around, trying to grab him. And some guy almost seemed to be sort of middle class, reasonably posh accent, responded to this by arresting a police officer, or attempting to arrest a police officer. And he grabbed him physically, and then the other police grabbed him free, and then he grabbed him again and said, "You are under arrest." So clearly, if that was the mood amongst relatively, I don't think these people were protesters, random people within the population had it up to here with this shit. And so I'll be reporting again tomorrow. It wasn't so much to report, but I'll be reporting again tomorrow afternoon after the trial. It finishes at 3 o'clock. I'll probably be on about 6, 7 o'clock. I'm sorry I can't give a time that I'm exactly going to do this, because there's lots of things going on. Unfortunately, my timings and discipline as to getting here and getting this organised is not so precise that I can say exactly what time it will be, but between about 7 o'clock and this time. Okay, thanks very much.